Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. I know it's been quite a long gap since the last one. I have got a job now, so that's not so bad. And I've been collecting these things, haven't had opportunity to put them out. So this is probably going to be a huge one with lots of different things to do with the Hamas-Iraq war. I think there's something about the post office scandal. I can't even remember all the things that I see on the news, and I think, I would like to talk about this, or I'd like to share this with you. Great viewers, listeners, whatever you are, YouTubers, wherever you get this or wherever this finds itself. So I'm just going to play them, and you can hear them, and I'll comment on them, I guess, after I listen to them, because they go back. This first one is the 10th of February, and we're currently on when I started this, because I don't think I'll complete it all today, is on the 27th of February. So yeah, this is the world we live in.
The ministry in Gaza says more than 28,000 Palestinians are now believed to have been killed since the war began, and 67,000 others injured. Israeli airstrikes reportedly killed 44 Palestinians in Gaza's southern city of Rafah this morning, just hours after Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered troops to evacuate civilians ahead of a ground invasion. Well, I'm joined now from Tel Aviv by the Israeli government spokesperson Elon Levy. Good to see you this evening. Thank you for your time. Perhaps you can just tell us what the plan is when it comes to Rafah.
Well, since the October 7 massacre and Israel's offensive against Hamas, we've seen most of Hamas's army collapsing. Hamas started this war with 24 battalions. We've shattered 18 of them, 2 are left in Khan Yunis, and there are 4 remaining in Rafah. And the plan is to continue dismantling the whole of Hamas's military machine so it can never perpetrate a massacre like it did on October 7th. Now, we are, of course, acutely aware of the humanitarian problems in the Gaza Strip and the fact that Hamas is determined to use civilians as human shields. That's why it's built all of its tunnel infrastructure underneath homes and schools and hospitals. And that's why, in order to keep civilians protected, the Prime Minister has ordered the army to come up with a plan to help civilians evacuate from Rafah so that we can target the Hamas military assets with the minimum harm to civilians. We want them to get out of harm's way so we can go after Hamas.
OK, so what is the plan to evacuate those civilians? Because you told many people to leave the north of the Gaza Strip and move south to shelter in places like Rafah. You're now telling them to leave Rafah. Where are they going to go? What's the plan there?
You're right, that's an astute observation. Before Israel began the ground offensive in the northern Gaza Strip, we gave several weeks' warning for civilians to be able to evacuate. We surrendered the element of surprise there so that civilians could get to safety and we could go after Hamas. But we've been clear from day one with the October 7 massacre that Hamas terrorists will not be immune anywhere in the Gaza Strip, and that's how we've already killed or either seriously wounded or apprehended over half of Hamas's fighting force. The army will now have to present to the government a plan to try to evacuate civilians, and we very much hope that UN agencies that until now have been resisting our attempts to try to get civilians to safety. In fact, outrageously, they've been condemning that as forced displacement instead of cooperating with our attempts to evacuate civilians out of harm's way. We hope that they will cooperate. They have a choice now.
So there's about 1 million people, it's been estimated, who are sheltering in Rafah now. How long are you going to give them to leave? And where are they going to go? You still haven't explained where they're going to go, given that much of Gaza now is flattened.
And that is part of the plan, that the Israeli army will have to present the Prime Minister, because we take our obligations under international law to keep civilians protected very seriously. And it's
But do you not have an idea of where they're going to go? I'm still waiting to hear where in Gaza they're going to go.
Well, there are open spaces in Gaza. There are places where it is possible to set up tent encampments so that civilians can get out of harm's way and not allow Hamas to use them as human shields. And we very much hope that the UN agencies that have until now been resisting our attempts to help civilians get to safety, have instead been urging them to stay in Hamas strongholds, will make the right decision and will help us get civilians to safety instead of trying to keep them in places where the terrorist army that perpetrated the October 7 massacre and is currently holding 136 hostages are trying to use them as human shields.
And will you help them with shelter? You talk about open areas where they can put up shelters. Will you help them with those shelters? Will you help them with the food? Because we're hearing today that people are grinding animal food into flour in order to stay alive.
Absolutely. We've not only placed no restrictions on the entry of food, water, medicine, and shelter equipment into the Gaza Strip. In fact, we have excess capacity at the Israeli crossings, which can now handle twice as much humanitarian aid if the world wants to send it. We've worked closely with foreign nations on setting up field hospitals in the Gaza Strip. The Emiratis, the Jordanians have done that, and any other nations that want to send shelter equipment or help to set up field hospitals to look after civilians and get them out of the way while Hamas is trying to use them as human shields are more than welcome to do so, and we will facilitate their delivery into the Gaza Strip.
Time isn't on your side, though, is it? On Channel 12 in Israel last night, the Prime Minister, it was reported, believes he only has a month to complete operations in Rafah because of international pressure, that he needs to do it before the start of Ramadan. Is that correct, that you want to get these operations underway and completed in less than 4 weeks?
Well, clearly we would like to be able to wrap up the war as quickly as possible. We have reservists who are our friends and family, have been ripped away from their ordinary lives, and we want to see them back home. But there is a trade-off between being swift and being thorough. And in order to be thorough, it will take time because we want civilians to get out of harm's way. We don't want to come in all guns a-blazing because we understand how catastrophic that would be. And that is why we are being rigorous and being thorough in dismantling Hamas's terrorist infrastructure. And of course, we very much hope that we can get the hostages home. The hostages we fear are being tortured and starved and raped and executed in the Hamas terror dungeons, and destroy the final 4 Hamas battalions so that the Gaza Strip can never again be used as a base for attacks against us, not as it was on October 7th, and not as it was for the lots of rocket fire.
Understood. What do you make of President Biden's comments? He said there are a lot of innocent people who are starving, a lot of innocent people who are in trouble and dying. It's got to stop, he said. I'm of the view the conduct of the response in Gaza has been over the top.
I'm not the president's spokesman, but it appears to me that he's being quoted out of context there. He was responding to a question about the hostage negotiations, and that would appear to be consistent with what Secretary Blinken said, that Hamas's response to those negotiations contains some clear non-starters. The United States urged us at the beginning of this war, when Hamas launched the October 7 massacre, it said if that had happened to the United States, its response would be swift, decisive, and overwhelming. And the United States still sees eye to eye with us with the need that this war should end with the destruction of Hamas, so it cannot perpetrate another October 7 massacre, as it has been promising to do again and again. And as for the question of hunger, which you just mentioned, this is very important. We want to see more humanitarian aid enter the Gaza Strip. At the moment, there are 15 operational bakeries in the Gaza Strip that are producing 2 million loaves of bread, pita, and rolls every single day. And any more aid that the international community wants to send into the Gaza Strip, we have capacity at our crossings to more than double that. And we welcome more aid shipments. It's important to make sure that it, however, that it reaches the civilians.
You're saying that the reason people aren't getting the aid, the reason people aren't getting the food that they need, isn't because you're holding it up at the border, it's because it's not being delivered to the border by the international community.
Well, the problem really is that once the aid is going through the Israeli border, there's a backlog on the Gazan side. So that's why the United Nations is asking us at the moment to keep Kerem Shalom closed on our side on Saturdays, because there's a backlog. We have a problem that the UN agency on the ground, UNRWA, is not able to distribute the aid as quickly as Israel is facilitating it. And worse than that, Jonathan, it's covering up the fact that Hamas is hijacking that aid. Our intelligence estimates that up to 60% of the aid that is entering the Gaza Strip is being hijacked by Hamas.
Where's that figure coming from? Where's that figure coming from?
Those are our intelligence estimates, and you, I hope, have already seen the widely circulating footage of Hamas gunmen on top of aid trucks inside the Gaza Strip. Unfortunately, the agency that is responsible for distributing aid is riddled with Hamas terrorists itself. And that's why we are urging the international community, for the sake of civilians in Gaza, to use the agencies that already have experience doing disaster relief in conflict zones. There's the World Food Programme, UNICEF. The World Food Programme, by the way, did an aid delivery to northern Gaza just 3 days ago. Instead of relying on UNRWA, which has been in cahoots with Hamas, it is simply an ineffective aid distribution mechanism. Okay. And people in Gaza are suffering because of the monopoly that this agency has been given on aid distribution.
Okay, we're out of time, but we appreciate your time as always. Thank you, Elon Levy, Israeli government spokesman. Thank you.
I think it's really important, all of that. I mean, like I always say with these things, I'm not interested in the tags that we put. These may sort of. I'm not so I'm not trying to get to on one side or the other. I'm looking at it from a human perspective. I'm not trying to do that to just get out of or for any reason. But the fact is that we're all human beings. That's how I see it. And there's, multiple sets of human beings who have boarded themselves up and given themselves tags, i.e., the country they're in, and then that allows us to fight each other and all that kind of stuff. So, but what interests me is, as if you were, say, a god or an alien coming and watching all this and seeing these humans that look much like each other. Well, all humans look like each other, isn't it? Fighting each other and doing these things. There's no winner here. There's no winner here for civilians, for human beings who are out of power. Let's put it that way. The ones in power, making decisions, whether this is in this instance is the Israeli government in their response to the October the 7th massacre, or whether it's the Palestinian Hamas, who are, terrorists who have, like they're saying, they're stealing the food, they're holding hostages. We know they're holding hostages. There's footage of them on the apparently. Even if that's not, we all know that they're holding hostages. They haven't denied that, and we know that they did the October the 7th attack on innocent civilians. They may not see it that way, but so it shows, there's the actual people of Palestine are not, the ones that, maybe believe in peace, if they still can hold on to that concept with all the disaster that has happened over the years between, the PLA and Hamas and Israel and the world, as it were. If there are people who can still hold on to that they're just suffering, children, let's put it that way, children who haven't been able to be brainwashed or made up their opinion yet of which side they want to be on. There's no win for them from either side. UNRWA, part of the United Nations, there's been a lot of question about them. There's some intelligence suggests that some people working for them were involved in the October 7th. And what I don't know about the UNRWA, do they employ people from the surrounding area? And of course that could be then seen as infiltrators or and that tarnishes them, but it may not be, like it's the same as if someone joined an organisation and did something bad. That doesn't mean the organisation is bad. That could be that person who purposely did that to be able to get into that vicinity and to get that information or whatever. But it's not looking good, and what I don't get is this idea of that, if you're going to have a war with someone, then isn't it my understanding of the rules of war is that the person who's, a party to it, the bigger party to it, has to supply the food and stuff. It seems a bit rich for the Israeli government, who I believe they do have nuclear weapons, no? So they do have some money, are asking the world to send food in for the Gazan civilians, because my understanding is because they've taken so much of it, they are actually in control of it, and therefore the onus should be on them to supply the food and water and all that kind of stuff, and the aid and the medicine, and not, say, well, yeah, we're facilitator if you send it to us. Why aren't they the ones doing it? I don't know. It just, whatever angle you look at this, it doesn't look very good for humanity. It is showing us, because even if, obviously if you were, I'm not, but if you were, say, Jewish, and you're seeing this, you may think that, well, okay, I suppose you could fall on two sides. One, it's either you back what President, or was it Prime Minister, I think it's President, isn't it, Netanyahu's doing, is for the safety of Israel. But the manner of it, maybe, some people could argue it's intentional, not intentional. I know there's been arguments for that. But it's not good, is it? Because 28,000, this was the 10th of February, 28,000 people. I remember when I first started doing these Pursuits of Truth about the Israel-Hamas conflict, they were, I think it was a few thousand people, and someone came up with it. They expected it to be 20 to 30,000 deaths. We don't know about how, when they say civilian, I suppose, we don't know the breakdown of how many are Hamas and how many are sympathisers and how many are civilians. So it's 28,000 people dead. But it's still a huge number to think that we've already reached that figure. I mean, some wars, small wars, don't get to that kind of number. I mean, I know I heard recently Ukraine, they lost 21,000 soldiers is their estimate. I'm sure that's under the number. But they're soldiers fighting in a war, 21,000. And this is 28,000. I mean, I don't know how many are civilian. Let's say, I don't know how many Hamas people they think they've killed, but that could be maybe 20,000 civilians. That's a lot of people in a few months. What was it? How many months now? Is it 4 months? And the idea of people just moving to either Egypt or moving back to, is it to the north, when there's what's left there, that they're talking about people, they're being fed and all this stuff, and they're talking about bread and pitta, and that's it. What quality of life do the people of Palestine have? And this is where I hear a lot of commentators talk about, this is counterproductive. What these children, just look at it from this point of view. It doesn't matter, which side you fall upon. Children are children, right? Imagine your child, or imagine your family of a child. Imagine you're just, the stereotypical peaceful family who believe in peace, who believe in love, who believe in believe in cohesiveness, everyone being together, working together, like that model kind of family. And you're starving, and you're being told to move here, you have to keep moving, and you see people getting blown up. Your whole life is, you remember how COVID was. We've been through COVID, how it was, how disruptive it was, having to stay at home, how it changed our very fabric. Imagine how I've never felt it. The nearest I've come is in the 80s, when we all had to worry about the IRA bombings and stuff like that in Portsmouth. And around in London, etc. But that compares to nothing, being in a war zone. Imagine how that must be, to feel like you can't leave. You're in this area, which you would consider your home area, your land, as it were. I mean, I don't believe in the division of the earth, but from the system that we live in point of view, and how, you can't go to school. Going to hospital is almost a death sentence, because they don't have anything to be able to help you. If you get, hit by a bomb, or you get under a building, it's not like when these earthquakes happen, some relief fund can come and some will start digging you up. There's too much of it to be able to do. Imagine how you would feel. What would it do to your mind, seeing all this, living through all this, not knowing when it's going to end? You begging that, please, Hamas, please give the hostages back. Please give yourself in. If you care about the people, do that. That's what these people could be thinking. Or please, Israel, please stop bombing near us, because we're on your side. We believe in peace. We want to get along with each other. Please don't kill us while we're trying to just survive and live and exist. I don't know, it's just... I don't see how children can see this and not... It just... not make anything good out of it, let's put it that way. That's... I don't know. Right, so we're going to go to the next one I have here.
Martin Griffiths said it was worse than Syria's civil war, or even... most senior officials told Sky News today...
Sorry, no, it says UN, sorry.
Hello, a very good evening. One of the United Nations most senior officials told Sky News today that the crisis in Gaza is the worst in his 50 years of experience. The Under-Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, Martin Griffiths, said it was worse than Syria's civil war or even the horrors of Cambodia in the 1970s. And tonight we start news at 10 with one example of the horror. Young children who saw their parents killed by Israeli troops and their disabled brother blinded by a grenade. Our team in Gaza filmed their testimony and our international correspondent John Sparks tells their story.
On the second floor of the Gaza European Hospital, there is a 5-year-old boy who was hit by a grenade. A fragment passed through his eye and lodged in his brain. But that's just part of Mumin's story. His brother and sister watched it all.
They raided our house and they shot our mum and dad. Then they started shooting at us.
Mumin's sister is called Buthena.
We went to another room, hiding from the soldiers. They started banging on the door, and then they blew it up.
In the first week of December, the Israel Defense Forces targeted the southern city of Khan Yunis in Gaza. Hamas militants tried to slow their advance as the city's northern suburbs were enveloped by war. On December 7th, Father Mohammed Hattab called his brother, a doctor, to alert the Red Cross. Their house had been surrounded by Israeli armor. His brother used WhatsApp. He said that the tanks behind the house and excavator destroyed the near house. It's very difficult to move without permission. Mohammed's son, Mumin, has cerebral palsy. Moving him is difficult, and they wanted to notify the Israelis in advance. On WhatsApp, the Red Cross was reassuring. Their representative said, "We've ensured that the houses would not be bombed or destroyed at night and in the future." But their confidence was misplaced. These pictures show Israeli troops applying overwhelming force in areas surrounding the Hattab family's home. The children's aunt, Dua Hattab, says she was in the kitchen when the troops came in.
They knocked down the front wall and entered the house. We were sitting down having lunch at the time. Then my brother Mohammed was shot. He was at the front, waving a white flag.
A grenade was thrown into the crowded kitchen, injuring Mohammed's wife, Hind. Family members say a soldier then shot and killed her. The device blinded Mumin in his left eye. Israeli soldiers found his brother and sister hiding in the bedroom.
They were interrogating us, asking us to show them the tunnels and to tell them where the resistance fighters were.
Their neighborhood had been turned into a war zone. This picture, taken on December 16th, one day after the IDF entered their home. Houses have been destroyed, trees and greenhouses obliterated. The ground chewed up by tank tracks and Israeli earthworks. The local college had been leveled and an IDF base thrust into the district to the north. The surviving family members walked through that battlefield, reaching Gaza European Hospital the following day. Every time the children cried, someone shot at them, they said. Now, Buthena sits amongst the tents with her coloured pencils. Her favourite colour? Pink, she says. Both she and brother Ahmed struggle to speak of their ordeal. Their aunt and uncle are busy now, learning to care for their disabled nephew. They say Moomin cries all night. They don't know how to make him happy.
They've lost their father and mother in one day, at the same time, in front of their eyes. This is a really difficult thing. No one can cope with this. No one can.
We provided the IDF with a detailed description of timings, events, and coordinates of the Khattab family home. It declined to comment. The Red Cross said responsibility for protecting civilians lies with the parties to the conflict. Robbed of their parents, robbed of their home. 3 orphans in Gaza left to question the incomprehensible. John Sparks, Sky News.
Well, in the last hour, my colleague Yalda Hakim asked an Israeli government spokesperson to comment on that report. This is what they had to say.
I've seen that report. It is, of course, very upsetting. I believe that the IDF is currently investigating that incident. I think if true, it's another reminder of the real tragedy that Hamas has brought on the people of the Gaza Strip by launching this needless war with the October 7 massacre and fighting from inside civilian areas. But as I said, I believe that incident is under investigation, and I'm afraid I have no further information.
Well, the backdrop to those events in Gaza are fears of an escalation to a wider war. The militant group Hezbollah has its main area of operations in southern Lebanon. And overnight, the IDF said a base in northern Israel was targeted by rockets from there. The attack killed an Israeli soldier and injured at least 8 others. In retaliation, the Israeli military hit 5 targets today, killing 4 people, including a woman and 2 children in a village near the Litani River. The increasing cross-border attacks have led to fears of a wider conflict linked to the ongoing war in Gaza. After weeks under siege, civilians were evacuated from the key Nasser hospital in Khan Yunis. From Jerusalem, our foreign correspondent Diana Magne reports.
Chaos in Adshit, southern Lebanon, after an Israeli airstrike. And here, 20 kilometers to the south, another massive strike. The IDF targeting what they say were Hezbollah military targets in response to rocket attacks from Lebanon into northern Israel. Casualties on both sides, 1 Hezbollah fighter, 1 20-year-old Israeli soldier, and in Lebanon, a woman and her children caught up and killed too. This is a dangerous front, which Israel and Hezbollah keep probing. Tens of thousands are already displaced, and concerns one push too many could trigger full-scale war.
We're in uniform, as you are too when you go home. The job is to think about readiness for war. This is our first task. No one disagrees with us, and we're now focusing on being prepared for war in the north.
In Khan Yunis in Gaza, evacuation from the last place of refuge there, the Nasser hospital. Doctors who have displayed such heroism throughout this war leading the way. And that takes courage. There has been intense fighting all around the hospital for weeks. Snipers claiming lives in the hospital forecourt. Gruesome video of one man hit and dragging himself through the hospital doors. Medical workers tentative about collecting him even there, scared to get too close in case they're targeted too. The UN's aid chief telling Sky News that Gaza was the worst humanitarian disaster he'd ever seen.
It's not as if the Khmer Rouge were not the horrors of their day in my youth. But the reason I said that Gaza is, in my experience, the worst is because people can't escape. They're blocked in. They're not able to run out of Gaza.
Israel's Prime Minister, though, sticking firm to his hardline stance. It must be Hamas who'll compromise, he says, not him. And so the horrors continue, the displacement and the uncertainty. The fear of the long tomorrow before this nightmare ends. Diana Magne, Sky News, Jerusalem.
To a developing story out of the States now. At least one person has been killed and up to 15...
I don't know. It's like... just to see those pictures of the disabled child was made more disabled because now he has only one eye. I just imagine how it would be like if say, we are by, what's that Bible phrase, by the luck of God, what's it, the something of God, by the grace of God, here am I, or something like that, that I'm just here, but I could have easily ended up in any country like all of us. So imagine if instead of being in the country that you're in, the safe country that you're in, you were in Gaza. And imagine you weren't sympathetic to Hamas, but you wanted maybe peace. You wanted there to be no fighting. You wanted to be able to live like Americans or Europeans, hand in hand with your fellow neighbours, as much as they do, or try to do, or at least having an existence where money and borders didn't have a place. You just wanted to have a great existence, the one existence you're going to get. And imagine you're in that war zone now. This is me with my kids, and having to, thinking about, well, I can't take anything with me. I've got to leave this area now and hope and, worry about lots of things. I can't imagine how I'd get my head around that, thinking that, well, I have to leave everything now. How would I leave everything? And what would I do about work? What would I do about paying bills? I suppose you don't have to do any of those things in a war zone. How is it to live like that? How would I, thinking that, God, please, be praying every day. I pray for all sorts of things all the time. But imagine in that war zone, I'd be praying all the time, please don't let any of us get hurt. Because if we get hurt, we have to go to hospital. Hospitals are dangerous now. If there are tunnels under there, if Israel are going in there to look for these Hamas people, we've seen the footage of that. If someone gets injured, they may not have the medicines. They may not have the beds because they're looking after other people. And how are you going to get there? You can't, just pop on a bus or hail a taxi anymore. Your whole existence, your whole normality of life has gone up in the window, and you can't get out. You can't go anywhere else. And everyone else around you that is facing the same thing. Imagine how stressful that could be. Imagine if you're neurotypical, how stressful that can be. Imagine if you're neurodivergent, how typical, if you're autistic, if you're disabled, if you're not good at, just imagine. It's just, I don't know, it just is... It seems like, I know war is a terrible thing, but we're all human beings. Like I say, take away the tags, take away Israel, take away Palestine, take away Hamas. And I know these are all, we all buy into these things and choose to do these things in a certain way, although a lot of us actually fall into these things because this is our surroundings and we become these things. But we're all human beings. Look what we're doing to each other. And us sitting by in the Western world allowing it to happen. Not that we're judge and jury or anything like that. It's just so depressing to see that we can't live with each other, that we could be so depraved. It doesn't matter what side you're on. Killing a human being. The Quran says it, and I'm sure the Bible says it as well about, the killing of one human being is like killing of all humanity. Where is this being listened to, those religious people, because we're in the Holy Land we're talking about, full of, the highest of the high when it comes to Jewish, Muslim, Christian. Where is all that love for humanity, for God's creatures, rather than following this idea of that it's okay to kill God's creatures if you can say, well, it's a war, or if you say this person is different to me, or I want this bit of land, whatever argument you come from, whichever side, there's no real justification for the killing of humanity. And especially there's no justification of killing of innocents and those who don't want to be party of any war. I don't know, it's just... How do we solve a problem like this? And what does it do to all of us who witness this and those who continue to experience it? All right, here's the next one.
to the largest hospital still functioning in Gaza today. Videos filmed by doctors in Nasser and Khan Yunis showed corridors full of smoke or dust and a struggle to move patients. Israel said the mission was precise and limited and said Hamas may have hid hostages there. Diana Magne reports from Jerusalem.
Inside the Nasser hospital, there is dust and debris and what sounds like burst water pipes. Imagine how frightening this must be. Listen to how frightening it is.
We are attacked by Israel army at the hospital.
Is there anybody still inside? The doctor keeps calling out. Other voices yell for stretchers. And then there is gunfire. Shooting, shooting, get your head down, he says. This was Mohammed Harara earlier in the week, warning of how dire things were even as he continued to treat the injured.
We are very afraid to be arrested by Israel army because they are surrounding us in every direction at the hospital.
We've collected video from several doctors' social media accounts documenting the chaos of Israel's early morning raid.
My people is so scaring that will be killed here in Nasser Hospital because Israel army has surrounded the hospital and we can't go out.
In the corridors of the orthopedic wing, people scrambling to move the immobilized and get the bedridden out of harm's way. Israel says they want the hospital to keep functioning and that their operation was worth it.
According to the information we have collected, I can now share some of the terrorists who took part in the massacre of October 7th. They were found by our forces inside the Nasser Hospital complex.
The cost, though, further depletion of what little healthcare there is left, and more terrified Palestinians looking for a place to shelter. Diana Magne, Sky News, Jerusalem.
There was more evidence today of the poisonous impact of the Israel-Hamas war here in the UK, what a Jewish charity described as an explosion in anti-Semitic hatred. More than 4,000 anti-Semitic incidents were reported last year. 2/3 of those incidents occurred on or after the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. And it was a 147% rise on the number recorded in 2022. Our correspondent Shingi Marike spoke to members of the Jewish community in Manchester.
Ben used to see his kosher pizza shop as a safe space for him and the community he serves. An idea that was shattered last year when someone called with this threat.
We will bomb you and all of that. So immediately, in one case as well, I closed the restaurant earlier on. We closed the restaurant 4 o'clock instead 10 o'clock because they said you need to evacuate the building. I called the police, get the police in, do the checks just to make sure that we're safe. I don't want to put anyone in danger, not my customers, not my staff, not myself as well.
His experiences part of a record rise in anti-Semitism, its impact being felt across the country, especially in some of Britain's biggest Jewish communities, like here in North Manchester, causing anxiety and anger among community leaders.
I'm annoyed that we are being made to feel like this, that we are made to be intimidated, that we don't want to walk out on our streets, that people are having to cover up identifiable signs of being Jewish. We're proud to be British Jews. We play a huge part in this country. And for us to feel like this, because of something that happened thousands of miles away, is unacceptable.
Free Palestine! A conflict in the Middle East is fracturing British society. At the University of Leeds and on campuses and cities across the country, pro-Palestine protests are now regular. The organisers we spoke to condemned anti-Semitism. But Jewish students here say they've faced discrimination on campus.
Every morning I wake up and I don't know if I should put on my yarmulke, my skull cap. I don't know if I should do it because maybe this day I'll get attacked.
An atmosphere Jamie says is only becoming more hostile.
I've had swastikas drawn on the cars on my road. In lectures, I know a lot of students have felt really uncomfortable listening to things that their lecturers have said, and they've had to, walk out of seminars and lectures.
Back in Manchester at this synagogue, a space for prayer, positivity and reflection has needed extra security. But the rabbi remains optimistic.
My general confidence in our society at the moment is not necessarily being borne out. My hope is that things will return to where they should be.
Faith is one thing, but the facts are stark. Anti-Semitism across society is rising at an alarming rate. Shingi Marike, Sky News, Manchester.
It sounds like something from a James Bond film, but NATO countries have been digesting today US intelligence reports which suggest Russia is developing a secret satellite-destroying nuclear-powered weapon to be based in space. President Putin's government called it a malicious fabrication designed to persuade America's Congress to approve new aid for Ukraine. From Washington, our US correspondent James Matthews reports.
24 hours on in Washington, D.C., they're still talking about a threat beyond the clouds, in space, where modern warfare has gone before, and reportedly Putin is going again. But whatever the truth is out there, down here, details had been thin on the ground.
I can confirm that it is related to an anti-satellite capability that Russia is developing.
Now, there's more.
First, this is not an active capability that's been deployed. And though Russia's pursuit of this particular capability is troubling, there is no immediate threat to anyone's safety.
Weaponry in space is nothing new. The American politicians who first leaked news of this development had spoken of a serious national security threat. The worry is about the risk faced by the global network of satellites, over 8,000 of them. In orbit now, the number used for communication stands at over 4,500. They include Elon Musk's Starlink network. Satellites looking down on the Earth number more than 2,000, including hundreds of military craft. And there are more than 300 navigation satellites, powering everything from maps on our phones to global shipping. The major concern is that a Russian nuclear-powered satellite could use its energy stores to send a pulse of electromagnetic energy, frying the circuits of Western satellites with the aim of leaving Russia's intact. These are pictures of Russia's defense minister visiting a company producing electronic warfare systems designed for space.
The Russians haven't launched any nuclear-powered satellites since the late 1980s, early 1990s. But we know there is evidence that they resumed this program about 2014. That is when this top-secret nuclear-powered project seems to have started.
Space watchers here are eyeing the potential threat.
What makes more sense is the possibility of some sort of space-based jammer. That is to say, a satellite that may get up close to other satellites and try and interfere with the signals coming from them, and that perhaps there's a nuclear power source for part of that.
Moscow has dismissed the claims as a ruse to engineer US support for aid to Ukraine. Over time, Russia's ambition in space has evolved.
Our cameras are some 12 kilometers from the pad.
Today, it looks different, but still in Washington, doesn't land well. James Matthews, Sky News, in Washington.
Last week, Sky News reported testimonies from current and former paramedics that sexual harassment in the job is widespread. Today...
Okay, so there was a lot on that one, wasn't there? Let me just queue up the next one. With, starting with Israel Gaza, the hospital. I mean, you couldn't see the footage, but the footage was like smoke everywhere. The building looked like bits of it were falling down. You could hear gunshots. People trying to wheel out the hospital beds in the orthopedics ward. I mean, it looked like something out of, one of these apocalypse or zombie movies, like Walking Dead or something. I mean, imagine how that must... Imagine you're in your hospital. I mean, I didn't think that under the conditions of war, you were allowed to attack hospitals. It doesn't have a good look, does it? But I suppose the problem is if Hamas are hiding underneath them because obviously they believe that's the safest place for them, then they're putting all the people inside that hospital in danger. Because if they're there and Israel have to catch them for what they did on October the 7th and continuing to do, then obviously they're going to have to go into the hospital in some way or other, even if it is, well, I don't know if it's against international law. I assume it isn't against international law if there's a credible threat and you get everyone to move out of the hospital. I suppose that's the thing. You need to clear the hospital before you go in with guns. But I suppose that would alert the people underneath in the tunnels, if that's the case. I mean, it's just, we only know what we're being reported, so it's difficult to know who to believe on either side because, that's what they say in war, as I've said many times, the first casualty of war is truth. Then we got on to anti-Semitism. I know there's been Islamophobia recently in the news as well. Both of them have gone up because of the Israel-Hamas conflict. The problem is these things always happen, unfortunately, with humanity, and I don't believe it is intrinsic. I believe it's learned and developed over time because of the way we divide each other and because of bad teachings and other things. I don't think it's the core in babies that are born to be racist or phobic. So, it's learned, is that everything we do is learned, so we can only blame ourselves and how we teach each other and the environment that we finance each other where we learn all these things. That's the root of it. But it shows how cascading an effect can be. One thing can sprinkle everywhere and endanger everyone's lives. People shouldn't be able, people shouldn't need to worry about these things. And what I was going to say is, like with the protests and things like that, you always get people who infiltrate things. And this is what I said about the learning part of things. Those people who aren't really there because they want, justice or peace, and justice and peace and humanity isn't about one person, it's about all people. So we should be very careful when we side because, it's about all of us deserve peace, all of us deserve justice, all of us deserve equality or equity, all of us deserve not to be discriminated against, all of us deserve to be human and to be treated humanely and to be seen as one. And that's the problem. You get a lot of people who turn up to protests who maybe don't believe in those core beliefs. They believe in, a part of it, 5% of it, and therefore it's easy for them to get involved in other things like racism, like being phobic. Like you're seeing, there's some of these marches that you see, the Palestine marches every weekend. 99% of it's peaceful, but you always get that 1% where they will be the ones saying things, racist things, phobic things, anti-Semitic things, or beating people up and doing whatever, or causing harassment to people. It's shameful, really, because what it really shows is humanity has degraded itself. Because this isn't intrinsic. Like I say, when a baby's born, they're not racist, they're not phobic, they're not anti-Semitic, they're not Islamic phobic, they don't have slurs and all those things. They're babies with nothing, and we teach them. So everything they're taught comes from someone else or someplace else, whether that's the environment, whether that's people, with peer pressure, TV or wherever. So we're all to blame for that. And it shouldn't be the case that people, no matter what's going on, matters right or wrong, people who are not connected with something got nothing to do with it. That's just people that just want to exercise their phobiasm or racism against the people they just, for them, don't like. But it just says something, what it says a lot about is the person who's doing it. Why are they not seeing the truth, the intrinsic truth? That everyone is the same. We're all human beings. We were all those babies once. We all should want peace and love and equity and for each of us. Anyway, Here's the next one.
Now, the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, says he's too ill to appear in court for his final bid to appeal against a ruling over his extradition to the United States. A two-day hearing at the High Court will decide whether he can ask an appeal court to block the extradition. Joining me now is Alan Rusbridger, the editor of Prospect magazine and also former editor-in-chief of The Guardian. Good evening. Thanks for being with us. And just to make the point, your newspaper, The Guardian newspaper, was involved in publishing some of these leaked cables. So I guess you are wanting to stand by Julian Assange.
Yeah, we've always said that we'll stand by the material that we published jointly together. And I'm really disturbed to see him being charged under the Espionage Act, which implies that he's some kind of spy. And I think this is a really alarming prospect. I mean, whatever you think of Julian Assange, and I know he has his detractors as well as his admirers, I think we should be worried by people engaged in publishing material being hauled in as though they were spies.
Yeah, and those are the charges. I mean, he's wanted on espionage charges, so they think he is a spy. What do you think he is?
He's many things. He's it's one of these 21st century characters who is a publisher, he's a journalist, he's an activist, he's a hacker, he's an impresario in a way. But certainly when we were working with him, the material that we jointly published was journalistic, and he collaborated with the New York Times, with The Guardian, with Der Spiegel, great titles in publishing material that was important.
I mean, the Americans say there's a difference to what you did and the New York Times did, that he dumped, 250,000 secret US cables on the internet and sort of to hell with the consequences, what they're saying, and that he put lives at risk, which wasn't the case with The Guardian and New York Times, so they weren't in trouble. What would you say about that?
Well, I had an interview on The World at One, the BBC programme today, where they had PJ Crowley, the former spokesman for the State Department at the time, and he was asked to name anybody that had come to harm as a result of the material. And he came up with one intelligence asset, as he called them, who was thrown in jail. And he said it's a possibility that this was down to Assange's leaks. So if that is the best that the State Department's former employee can do after 15 years, it seems to me that the evidence is a bit thin on the ground that people actually did come to harm.
Yeah, it was interesting. I heard the interview, and he went on to make the argument that there was harm when he colluded with the Russians, wasn't it, to undermine the,
that was,
what was it, 2016 election? He went on to talk about that.
But that's not what he's being charged for.
No.
I think lots of people were deplored what Assange did then, but that's not what he's being charged for. And I mean, what's happening throughout the world now, particularly after the Snowden revelations, is that America, Australia, the UK, and other countries are trying to tighten up anyone who wants to look at the world of state security. And they want to make it a crime to even own material, let alone publish it. They want to throw editors in jail for a very long time. And the thing about the Espionage Act, like the Official Secrets Act in this country, is there is no defense. So it's all very well to say, let Assange go to America and argue his case. He won't be allowed to argue his case.
Well, that was going to be my point. I mean, do you think he can possibly get a fair trial in the US?
I don't think so. I mean, the argument I was in court this morning, the first argument that his barrister made was that the very use of the word espionage, the Espionage Act, means that this is a political case. And I think that may even be common ground on both sides. They made that point because the extradition treaty between the US and the UK prohibits people being extradited for political acts. So even though I think no one seriously believes that Assange in 2010 was engaged in anything that looked like espionage, this may be the weakness in the government, in the US government's case.
Yeah, I mean, he didn't appear today because of illness. Do you think that, his health could be a consideration in all this?
Well, it certainly was with the first judge who didn't allow the extradition to go ahead. They said there was a fear that he might kill himself in an American jail. We heard today that he might be jailed for between 35 and 40 years. He's already been in solitary confinement in Belmarsh for 5 years. So I don't think he is in great shape. And I think it's reasonable to have pretty serious concerns about how he would stand up.
Yeah, and as you say, he has been in Belmarsh for all this time, and you've kind of answered this, but do you not think there is a case, to say, okay, let's go, let's, take part in the American justice system and prove my innocence?
Well, I like to play it the other way around. Can you imagine an American journalist living in London who decided to write some stories about, say, the Indian nuclear program? And the Indians saying, but that breaks our secrecy laws. You must extradite the American journalists to stand so we can throw them in jail. Can you imagine the Americans ever agreeing to that? It would never happen.
What do you think, if he is extradited, what impact do you think that could have on investigative journalism?
Well, I just think it's a bad precedent to whatever Assange did to say that this merited the use of the Espionage Act. And I think there are American lawyers and journalists who are worried by this and thinks it sets a dreadful precedent, and that American journalists who may not like Assange, may not identify with him, should be more worried.
Yeah, and just finally, do you think that's one of the problems? It's the sort of likability. He's done all these other things. There is this issue of whether, journalists are supporting him, to the extent that I heard the other day that they thought journalists should be supporting him more.
The main journalist bodies are supporting him. I think one has to put aside whether he's likable or not and look at the principle. And I think on the principle, he deserves support.
Yeah, okay. Alan Rusbridger, good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed.
So yeah, there about Julian Assange. I think I covered it previously on The Pursuit of Truth. This seems to make no sense that for someone who, no one's questioning the validity of the data that he's given out on WikiLeaks. We wouldn't have known about the war crimes that were committed in Iraq and Afghanistan by the West if it wasn't for these leaks. So no one's saying he lied or he made it up. So basically he's being charged with telling the truth because we have adopted this idea, this system that certain people are allowed to keep the truth to themselves. And, that's government or military or whatever. And if you whistleblow, if you tell that truth, then you can be punished for telling that truth. It's absolutely insane, isn't it? It has no merit to it. It's just another one of these very stupid things that, like war and other things, where we've accepted an idea that makes absolutely no sense. And like they're saying, there's no cases of him putting anyone in danger, but it's just from that point of view that it wasn't that he was just giving away secrets for secret's sake. These were to do with crimes that took place that otherwise would not have been talked about because they don't want to. And when other countries, when the West likes to point fingers at other countries and their war crimes and things they do, it's like when there's, like with the Navalny case, who's either died or been murdered, with him, standing up against Putin, and when the West will sort of say, look how bad Russia is, how it treats people, how it treats the truth, how they're trying to regulate it, and yet the West is doing it in a way that it's been acknowledged. Well, this is an acceptable way to do that. It's acceptable to put a man in prison for 30 years for telling the truth. No one's disputing the facts that it's the truth. They don't like it and trying to charge him with espionage when he's not actually the one who actually got the information. He just published it. Chelsea Manning is my understanding is the person who got a lot of that information and was pardoned by was it Donald Trump or Barack Obama? I'm not sure which. And I don't know why Assange wasn't pardoned as well, because he only published it. He didn't actually get the data, which is the espionage part, and that's just because then he can't defend it, because apparently in this thing you heard that they can't defend that. It's just I don't know. It's just a mockery of the idea of truth, and yet we make all these films. We make all these films about truth and these dramas. I'm sure in the future they'll make a drama about Assange. I think there already was one with Benedict Cumberbatch, where it will show this. And we make lots of these dramas about people who stand up against the system or tell the truth and this, that and the other. And yet here in real life it's happening, and, I mean, it's just... Anyway, let me stop this. One of the toys is... I've activated it with my foot walking around. There we go. All right, let's move to the next one. This was the speaker getting irate I think he was... Some people say he was helping Labour out. But what interested me part of this was actually what the SNP said about the Gaza situation, although... There's another bit I think I've still got with Sam Coates of Sky News, where they talk about, that really they didn't really care about the issue. Not that Israel's going to be watching this vote to see whether there should be a ceasefire or not. The only vote they'd ever listen to would be if it was in the United Nations or if it was in America. So it's a bit pointless for them to do this. But the fact that they were just trying to score points with each other, and that these people's lives didn't really seem to matter to them, that they would just have this silly argument. But what he said, I thought, resonated. It's a shame we're not getting this from the English side.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move the SNP motion that's been tabled in my name and those of my right honourable friends, which calls for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza from all combatants.
Member, give way.
And I wish to put on record, once again, our unequivocal condemnation of the Hamas attack of October the 7th, and repeat both our call for the immediate release of all the hostages and to see those involved in those atrocities called to account for their actions.
Hear, hear.
The war in Gaza is one of the great defining moments of our time. Yet until today, this House has not been given the opportunity to debate both the unfolding human catastrophe and the wider implications for regional and global stability. Nor have we had the opportunity to debate the urgent and pressing need for an immediate ceasefire as an essential first step to finding a lasting and just peace. Mr. Speaker, no one would deny that Israel has the right to defend itself. Every country has that right. What no country has the right to do, however, is to lay siege to a civilian population, carpet bomb densely inhabited areas, drive people from their homes, erase an entire civilian infrastructure, and impose a collective punishment involving the cutting off of water, electricity, food and medicine from civilians. And no country, regardless of who they are, in the name of self-defence, can kill civilians at such a pace and on such a scale that in just 16 weeks, almost 30,000 are known to have died, with a further 80,000 injured. Mr. Speaker, we cannot allow the core principle of self-defence to be so ruthlessly exploited and manipulated in order to legitimise the slaughter of innocent civilians. If we do that, then what hope is there for the future of international rule-based order? An order created to protect people from atrocities, not to be used as a smokescreen to hide the execution of them. If we accept what Israel is doing in Gaza as the new norm, as the new accepted standard of self-defence, then we undermine that core principle which is meant to protect and defend us. And therefore we cannot accept that what is happening now is self-defence, not just because of the precedent that it will send. And I have no doubt that that thought contributed to the United States issuing its clearest warning yet to Netanyahu, that they would not support his proposed ground offensive in Rafah. And this is why the UN Security Council are currently debating a ceasefire. And as we speak today, and even the US have recognised that a ceasefire must happen for a peaceful political solution. Of course, it does not go nearly far enough, but it does show that things are moving, opinions are changing, and the guarantees Israel has come to rely upon are gradually withdrawing.
The member give way.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I think there are very few people, not only in this House, but in this country at the moment, who would differ from the sentiments being expressed by the Scottish National Party spokesperson here today. We all watch with horror each night the torture of the people in Gaza, and we remember every morning the pain being felt by the families whose loved ones are being held hostage. But would the honourable member not agree with me that we would serve their cause so much better, and ourselves in this place, if we built a consensus behind an opinion today, rather than indulging in petty party politics, which serves no one well?
I thank the Honourable Lady for that intervention. I'm not quite sure she means about petty party politics, and the behaviour we're seeing today has been pretty petty, but we are all about consensus. Anything that can build a consensus for peace, which has to be based around peace, justice and an immediate ceasefire, then we will be there.
Very grateful for the Honourable Member for giving way. If I could just highlight something that I think is more important than some of the conversations we've had to this moment. On Monday, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights released a statement saying that UN experts had uncovered that Israeli forces in Gaza and the West Bank are being accused of egregious human rights abuses, including arbitrary detention, extrajudicial killings and sexual violence, including rape. The Israeli government, of course, have dismissed this without any investigation. Does the Honourable Member agree with me that this government should be pushing hard for a proper investigation for people to be held to account for these kinds of gross human rights abuses?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with my honourable friend. I think it is vitally important that whether it's a perceived ally or a perceived foe, an egregious breach of human rights is an egregious breach of human rights and should be taken as exactly that and should be investigated without fear or favour.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. I think one of the things which has defined this House over the last couple of years has been the unity over Ukraine, and it's been really important that we've all stood together on all sides against Putin. Can I just appeal to my honourable friend to reflect on what's required of all of us today, because the issue is one of principle, of those that are facing famine and death in Gaza. And it's important on all of us across this House to show the appropriate leadership, to come together, to speak up against the human rights abuses that are taking place. And woe betide any of us that fail to show that particular leadership. Now is the time, today is the time for this House to come together and stand up for those in Palestine that need our support.
I do agree with my honourable friend, and I think we all have a part to play in bringing peace and saving innocent lives. So I was somewhat surprised to hear the Shadow Foreign Secretary on Sunday when he seemed to dismiss and downplay the importance of this debate, when he said on the radio, it's not this vote that will bring about a ceasefire. And of course, he is right. Voting for an immediate ceasefire today won't by itself bring about the end of the slaughter. But the impact and the optics of this Parliament, hitherto one of Israel's staunchest allies, saying enough is enough and calling for an immediate ceasefire, would be enormous. And while not in and of itself able to bring about a ceasefire, support for this motion would further remove that ever-thinning veil of legitimacy that the UK's continued support gives to Israel's merciless war in Gaza. And it would show the beleaguered and battered people of Palestine that we do care and that we have not forgotten them. And calling for an immediate ceasefire would also be a pivotal moment in the campaign to stop UK arms sales to Israel. Because as the South African Foreign Minister said last week, the decision to stop the fighting in Gaza is in the hands of the countries that supply Israel with their weapons. And who knows, it might actually help some of the UK's political establishment and those seeking to aspire to that position to locate their moral compass.
I thank the honourable member for giving way. He refers to the way of stopping the conflict. Does he not agree with me that the only way, the most certain way of ending this conflict is by Hamas releasing the hostages, including the 9-month-old baby who was kidnapped by Hamas? And if Hamas released the hostages straight away, that is a surefire way to ceasefire, and that is what we should be talking about.
Send the motion. I think the very first sentence I said was we utterly condemn the Hamas attack and we implore them to release the hostages, but there has to be a pathway to reaching that. And so the Shadow Foreign Secretary, when he said that this would not bring about a ceasefire, was right, but to try and downplay the importance of this motion does not serve him well. And I do suspect that these moments do not come around very often, as he knows, and he understands only too well the importance of tonight's vote. Because it's moments like these, it is moments like these which shape the ethical identity of a country. And it's the decisions that we take now which will reverberate down the decades, and they will define who we are and what we stand for. And that is why we are calling so clearly and unambiguously for an immediate ceasefire. Because anything else presupposes that there can be a military solution to this conflict. And any other form of words threatens to give credence to the idea that Israel, by dint of deploying its massive military capacity in Gaza, that will somehow be enough to destroy Hamas. When in reality, as everyone knows, and indeed history tells us, the only possible solution to this crisis is a political solution.
For the purpose of clarity, I could understand his argument better if he were talking about what the Americans seem to call a temporary ceasefire to see if more hostages could be released. But he appears to be calling for an unconditional ceasefire, which, and I see people nodding, which would leave all the hostages at the mercy of Hamas. And does not that put Israel in the position where previously they had to release 1,000 people who had been criminally convicted to get one soldier back, and one of the people they released was the person who organised the Hamas atrocities on the 7th of October.
I thank the honourable member for that. I am absolutely clear. There has to be a roadway, there has to be a path towards peace, and that has to start with an immediate ceasefire. If it doesn't, then there is no pathway. I will address directly the issue of humanitarian pauses in a moment. But Mr. Speaker, when the SNP last called for a vote on a ceasefire on the 15th of November, the death toll in Gaza stood at 11,320. Already a heartbreaking number of people killed. Just yesterday, Johns Hopkins University and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine released their analysis, which showed that if this conflict continues on the same trajectory, there will be between 58,000 and 75,000 additional civilian Palestinian deaths in the next 6 months. So we know categorically what the consequences of inaction will be, and no one can in the future claim that they did not know or that they did not understand the consequences of what they were doing tonight. Absolutely.
Very grateful to him for giving way. Does my honourable friend agree that while some rules may be more malleable than others, the rules of international law are very clear on self-defence, and that the use of self-defence must be proportionate, and that on any view, 30,000 civilians dead, the majority of whom are women and children, is excessive and not a proportionate use of force?
I thank my honourable friend for that, and she's absolutely right. And the danger that we have is if we accept Israel's response as being the new norm, then the danger that everybody across the world, regardless of their circumstances, are put in is terrifying. It's a terrifying example to set and a terrifying precedent which should worry us all, and I thank her for that intervention. And to address the point from earlier on from the honourable member, if no one can argue, I believe, with any credibility on what they used to call, and some people still do, humanitarian pauses, that convoluted idea of an organised fixed-term pause in the killing, one which would allow emergency aid into Gaza only to have the carnage resume at a pre-arranged date and time. And I think that should be seen for what it always was, a smokescreen for politicians to hide behind while waiting to see which direction the wind of public opinion might blow. Well, we have seen the way that public opinion is blowing across the world and here in the UK, with millions taking to the streets and polls showing 75% support plus for an immediate ceasefire. And the harsh reality is that the government, having expended so much political and diplomatic capital on defending and justifying Israel's prosecution of this war, now finds itself stuck on the wrong side of global opinion. And consequently, the UK's international reputation has been so diminished that when the process of finding a just, lasting peace in the region does begin, the UK will struggle to play a meaningful part in it. So if this government cannot see the long-term damage that it is doing, then it's up to this House to tell them by demanding that immediate ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire which has already been endorsed by Pope Francis, the Archbishop of Canterbury, the moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, the Archbishop of York, Scotland's Catholic bishops, the Catholic bishops of the Conference of England and Wales, the Church of England's House of Bishops, the Muslim Council of Britain, the Quakers, the leaders of the Methodists and the United Reformed Church, the Lutheran World Federation, the UN Secretary General, the UN General Assembly President, UNICEF, the World Food Programme, the World Health Organisation, Save the Children, Amnesty, Médecins Sans Frontières, Oxfam, ActionAid, the International Rescue Committee, Action Against Hunger, Care International, Medical Aid for Palestinians, the Council for Arab-British Understanding, the Balfour Project, Islamic Relief, Christian Aid, War on Want, the Carter Centre, War Child, Unite the Union, Unison, the King Centre, World Vision, WaterAid, Tear Fund, Street Child, Star Network, Peace Direct, Mercy Corps, Civicus, and scores more of churches, NGOs, charities and individuals who have seen Israel completely abandon international humanitarian law by imposing their collective punishment on a defenceless civilian population. A civilian population in which just 16 weeks, an estimated 18,000 Palestinian children have been left without a single living relative.
The honourable member for giving way. The only way we can ensure a permanent end to the cycle of violence is by facilitating the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state alongside Israel. The main blocker to this is Prime Minister Netanyahu, who has doubled down on his opposition to an independent Palestinian state. Does my honourable friend agree that the UK must show strong opposition to Netanyahu's plans by unilaterally recognising the state of Palestine as a matter of urgency?
I could not agree more with my honourable friend. Absolutely. The United Kingdom has shown a dereliction of duty towards the Palestinians, and we have been very, very supportive and will continue to be supportive of a Palestinian state. But all of those organisations and individuals and churches that I listed, they will not ignore the evidence of their own eyes, nor will they turn a deaf ear to the cries of suffering Palestinians, and neither should we. Mr. Speaker, the Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish once wrote, "In silence we become accomplices, but when we speak, every word has the power to change the world." So as I bring these remarks to a close, I want to share with the House the words of those being forced to live through this hell every single day. 30-year-old Islam Harb lost 3 of his 4 children, along with his mother, 2 of his sisters, and both his brothers, when a missile hit their home. Islam said, "My family spent days trying to dig the remains of the dead out of the rubble. The body of my brother Khalil was found 200 metres away from the house due to the power of the strike, in pieces. My children's small bodies were torn to pieces." His surviving sister, Athlam, added, "My brother Mohammed was only recognised by his hair. Nothing was left of my brother Khalil except his hand." And 30-year-old Ahmad Nassam.
Listening there to Brendan O'Hara, the spokesperson on foreign affairs for the SNP, opening this debate in the Commons ahead of a vote calling for a ceasefire in Gaza.
Oh, just because they want to put an advert. Hey, not a place to put an advert at that point, no?
The inquiry went through...
There's the ramifications of that.
Yes, a lot of it is about wearing robes.
Right, this is about... So what happened basically is, I believe I don't know, because there were different motions. It was meant to be opposition day, but the Speaker did something where he made amendments to the SNP's thing. I think he made amendments from Labour and Conservatives, so weakening it a little bit. And I think in the end there was no actual vote, and it was carried forward that, you know, that the House recognised, you know, the ceasefire, but actually no one voted for it. It just got through, or maybe there was just Labour there. I think the others walked out in disgust because of what the Speaker had done, thinking that he'd overstepped his mark, because he used to be apparently a Labour supporter.
Role. Thanks, Will. How important, Sam, is the role of Speaker? Is it purely ceremonial?
It's not, because the Speaker can really shape the reputation of the Commons, and the reputation of our democracy does matter. If people have trust in it, that's, you know, by definition a good thing. When people don't have trust in it, then, you know, when the foundations of, you know, the respect for our governing system starts to crumble, we're in a bad place. Look at countries where that has happened, and look at the example in America, quite frankly, where conventions, rules, and electoral laws have been questioned there. It does get quite ugly, and you know, and as a society, we get less cohesive. So, yes, a lot of it is about wearing robes, following ancient rules, saying things that don't necessarily make a lot of sense to viewers at home. But at its core, he represents, or she needs to represent, the trust of the public in the parliamentary system. That's why yesterday really, really, really mattered.
And the whole time, the issue at heart in that debate has now been completely lost. And the fact that there was a debate over a ceasefire, about the language being used with regards to Israel and Gaza Hamas, that's all been completely forgotten.
Oh yeah, but I mean, in a sense, it was never really about that. Let's be absolutely clear. It's a plague on all their houses. Labour was playing games, the Tories were playing games, the SNP were playing games, everybody was playing games. And I don't think the Israeli Prime Minister was tuning in at 6 o'clock last night to find out the result. You know, this was about, at best, internal political management of the various political parties, at worst, a kind of game of, you know, parliamentary one-upmanship by people who don't have enough to do because we're at the kind of late end of a, you know, slightly painful parliament.
But Wilf, I mean, isn't that why any speaker should be fleet-footed enough to see that each of the parties are playing games and that he shouldn't fall into the bear trap?
Well, I quite agree, and more to the point, put the impartiality and the need to seem impartial above all else, and particularly given the advice he was given by his most senior clerk yesterday as well, it does seem like a bit of a misstep. The only quick thing I have to just bring up, Kay, not to belittle that story.
Okay, so it was just a bit about
addresses to the Federal Assembly. It's been running for...
See that sometimes a lot of this is nonsense and they were just playing party politics rather than being serious. I mean, no matter what happened, they all should have stayed and voted, shouldn't they? If they cared about the people that they're talking about. Anyway, here's the next one.
Welcome back. Aid agencies are warning that civilians who've fled civil war in Sudan lack sufficient food, water and shelter. Some 700,000 people have been forced to flee their homes. Let's bring in the Secretary General of the Norwegian Refugee Council, Jan Egeland, who joins us now live from Oslo. Thanks so much for joining us on this. To what extent do you think this is the forgotten war?
It is the forgotten, neglected, overseen war of the planet at the moment. In Sudan, there are now 9 million people displaced by violence internally inside Sudan. They are not getting out, but they have been had to flee their homes for their lives, really. These are people in Darfur in the west, in Khartoum, the capital city, and the Kordofans in the south, and elsewhere. On top of that, to eastern Chad, where I just visited, 700,000 people have fled to eastern Chad, the poorest place on earth, from Darfur. It is beyond belief, the suffering. It's beyond belief, the needs, and it's not making headlines across the world as it should.
Well, we have reported on it because of Yusra El-Bagir's reporting. We haven't reported on it quite to the same extent as say, the crisis in the Middle East. But why do you think that is? Why do you think it has got less coverage relative to the horrors that are present?
Yeah, I mean, most TV channels hasn't covered it at all. So I'm glad Sky News is. I think there are two reasons, really. Compared to 20 years ago, when the Darfur crisis was on the desk of Prime Minister Blair of the UK, President Bush of the US, the French President, the EU Commission, every week. I think the world is more introvert. It's more nationalism, more discussion. Aren't we having problems ourselves, really? And in addition to crisis, war in Europe, in Ukraine, and the horrors of the trapped population inside Gaza sucks all the attention there is in a world of nationalism. So we have to fight really for Sudan, because now it is 3 times as many people affected, 3 times as many people fleeing to Chad, etc., as when it was on top of the world agenda 20 years ago.
My next question, maybe you'll be upset about it, given your answer just there, but I wondered what your take was on what happened in the UK Parliament this week, and clearly there was an extraordinary amount of political clashes, but the result of those clashes was MPs in the UK voting for a form of ceasefire in the Israel-Gaza war. What is your take on that?
Well, I am very, very much in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza. This was a senseless, arbitrary bombardment ever since the horrific terror that took place in Israel on the 7th of October. Well, we all agree on the war on terror, but this is a counterproductive campaign on a population in Gaza where we will all agree that the women and the children are completely innocent. So whatever is happening in the UK that is providing arms to the Israeli bombardment, and the US, which is providing arms, and Germany is providing arms, I hope to see more of, really, because this senseless slaughter in Gaza cannot continue as it is.
Of course, the hostages still held by Hamas, totally innocent as well, and the big reason why the fighting does continue. A very complicated topic that we don't have time for. Jan, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, this weekend marks 2 years since Russia invaded Ukraine. It's become a war of attrition with small territorial gains for either side coming at a high cost in casualties and lost equipment. And Ukraine's survival depends on support from its Western allies. Russian forces control large parts of the east and have set their sights on the country's second largest city, Kharkiv. Our international correspondent, John Sparks, has seen firsthand how a lack of ammunition is hampering Ukrainian efforts to protect the front line. His report includes images of body bags.
You can't see the Russians massing in the forest, but you know they're there. Ukraine's 32nd Brigade took us to a command center a few kilometers from the front, east of the city of Kharkiv, and we found long faces and hard stares in their cabin.
They're storming us, breaching the barbed wire, so they can pass right through.
The Russians used to assault their positions once or twice a day, but now the attacks are continuous.
At the moment, for every shell that Ukraine fires, how many come back from the Russians?
1 to 10.
1 to 10. 1 to 10. They've told us we've got to move out. It's too dangerous. Cluster bombs, mortar fire, artillery. The forest is alive with this stuff.
President Zelensky is desperate to rearm the Ukrainian military, but the members of this anti-tank unit were trying to make their only weapon work. Screwdrivers and a hammer deployed to bring a Soviet-era bazooka back to life. Something they achieved eventually. The commander uses it to fire at Russian troops and says it can be deadly. Problem is, he's barely got any grenades.
We've got enough for 12, 13, 15 minutes. That's it.
The pressure here is building, as is the collective cost. We met a family dentist, now charged with evacuating casualties from the front line. But many don't survive, he says. It's taking too long to reach them.
This is due to the mortar fire, the shelling. Sometimes it's impossible to reach their positions. It can take 2 or 3 days, even more.
A generation of Ukrainians are dying on the battlefield. Their fellow citizens are trying to hold the line. John Sparks, Sky News, in Kharkiv region.
Well, let's go now to Moscow and our correspondent there, Diana Magne. Diana, it's Russia's annual Defender of the Fatherland.
I don't know.
saying that it might have been something different.
I mean, it just shows like the senselessness of war, no? I don't know. I don't know what this one was. I don't know what this story was about.
At least she is my person.
They say that good drama makes you feel, it makes you think, and in some circumstances, it makes you act. We saw this just last month with the ITV drama about the Post Office IT scandal, which brought about more progress in the fight for justice than almost 2 decades of campaigning. The programme showed the power of the arts to elevate an issue into the national consciousness and bring about change. Well, now a drama series based on the diaries of a palliative care doctor who worked on the front line during the Covid-19 pandemic is aiming to expose the grim reality of what it was like for NHS workers at the height of the crisis.
I'm not going to make it home this weekend, sorry, it's madness. There's currently no PPE at all.
They were overwhelmed. The virus is always going to be ahead.
Trust the guidelines.
This is insane.
Irvin, where's the defib? Where's the gas trolley?
The public can be assured that we have a clear plan.
There's no plan.
Members of our team are wearing bin bags and going home wondering if they're going to die in the night.
Don't go there.
We're already there. You know, this thing is spreading. They just keep coming, but no one is giving up.
Well, Dr. Rachel Clark, the author of the memoir Breathtaking, on which that series is based, joins me in the studio now. Rachel, good to see you. It's being billed as the story you haven't been told, you being the British public. What are you showing people with this series about what went on behind closed hospital doors?
I think we're showing something that is almost unimaginable unless you experienced it. That gulf between inside and outside the hospitals is so vast that even, for example, when I came home from work, I couldn't even explain to my own husband what I was going through. It was so alien, so traumatic, so chaotic and frankly terrifying that I couldn't communicate it. And I think unless you are a patient, a frontline member of staff, or occasionally, because so few of them were allowed in, a relative, you just couldn't imagine it. And that was really our overriding ambition, to take the British public by the hand and lead them through the doors of the hospital and say, here it is, this is what it felt like, this is our sparing witness to our unfolding reality, please watch it, please don't look away.
Yeah, you have said please watch if you feel able, please don't look away, because it's too soon for some of those involved. I've noticed that nurses and doctors have reached out to you on social media and said, this is really important, thank you for doing this, but I just can't watch it at the moment. Why do you think it's so important to relive this experience so soon? I mean, it's been 4 years, but that is very recent history. It's still so raw for so many people.
Well, I think, and I know this from my work in palliative medicine, as an individual, if you go through a traumatic experience, there's a great temptation very often to sort of bury it, suppress it, say, right, I have to move on from that, one foot in front of the other, so I'm going to just consign that to history. And of course, with traumatic experiences such as grief, that often doesn't work. What you've tried to bury just festers, it's still there. And to some extent, I feel as though the whole country collectively has been through a trauma, which, of course, on the one hand, we want to forget. But actually, how do you do that if you're not talking about it, sharing what you went through with each other? I know that when I talk to colleagues in the NHS about COVID, nearly always, without fail, in a minute or two, they start to cry as they relive what they went through. That's real trauma that is buried, but having a terrible impact on people. And I think all of us, public as well, we all lost something during COVID. It was traumatic for all of us. And if we don't talk about it, how do we actually process it?
In the drama, the characters are fictitious, but everything is based on real life experiences. Doctors and nurses, their testimony, including yours. So everything you see on screen actually happened up and down the UK. Now, what's interesting about the series is that it's cut between the drama and actual footage from news outlets at the time. At the time, the public was told the NHS was not being overwhelmed. It could cope. That was from the Prime Minister at the time, Boris Johnson. The public was also being told there is no shortage of PPE. That was from the Health Secretary at the time, Matt Hancock. What we're being shown here on screen in this series is actually that wasn't what was happening. In fact, it was the reverse. We just couldn't see it.
Yes, precisely that. And for me, that was an imperative for making this series. As the pandemic unfolded, we knew from our frontline experience that Hancock's claims about PPE were not true. We didn't have PPE. There were colleagues dying in intensive care from COVID they'd caught in the hospital because they didn't have PPE.
There were scenes of nurses in a storeroom making PPE out of bin bags.
Yes, and that literally happened. And I vividly remember colleagues in other hospitals, other wards, who were told, no, you can't bring in PPE that you've gone off to B&Q or a DIY shop to wear. You are not allowed to wear this. It may frighten people. Take it off. Go back to being unprotected. And staff were terrified. I'd have staff coming to me saying, please, will you witness me signing my will, which I've made because I'm so frightened I'm going to die. And I think this is public service television in the sense that the public has a right to know what was really happening. It's just not right or acceptable that the public were not getting the truth from the government.
I mean, this drama shows what you all went through with regard to PPE, with regard to your own personal home lives, you know, not being able to see your families. You know, you spent the last moments with patients, not their families, and even that was relatively anonymous because you had masks and shields. You know, you must still think about those people that you couldn't save. What do you want to happen from this series? Because we've seen the effect that Mr. Vates versus the Post Office has had on another national scandal. What is it you want to happen from this? Is it a conversation? Is it perhaps for it to move the dial in the NHS strikes? Because, of course, you know, people will see, you know, how NHS staff literally put their lives on the line for us during that time. What is it you want to happen?
Most of all, I want us to talk about this. I think there is an immense amount of healing that's needed in society, and the first step to healing and recovering psychologically from COVID is talking about it. But more specifically, it appalls me that not only have over 850 health and care staff died of COVID, but right now there are thousands of staff who are deeply traumatised, who cannot access any psychological support from the government. There are staff who have been left severely disabled from long COVID. And even now, when we go into our hospitals, we don't have the proper PPE. We don't have... Still, we have pitiful paper masks. We don't have the proper masks that protect you. That is a national scandal. That's treating staff as though they are utterly expendable, and it's wrong. And I think the government has a duty to protect workers truly and actually address the fact that there's a mountain of psychological and physical suffering in the NHS.
That is the legacy
that they're ignoring
of COVID within the system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Rachel Clark, well, you're giving them a voice, and thank you for that. The series is on ITV now. In fact, I think the second episode is tonight. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Rachel Clark. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I saw that, the drama. It was very good. It was very insightful. A lot of things that we weren't told at the time. Like, one of the main things was the decision over death. You know, the government kept saying, no, we haven't reached that stage where we have to decide who lives and who dies. And I think they kept that all the way to the end. Whereas in this drama, written based on the memoir of a palliative care nurse who actually worked during COVID in a hospital, the woman you heard speaking now, they were making decisions. They had to decide because they didn't have enough beds and they didn't have enough ventilators. And so they had to decide, well, this one's more healthier. This one may live. This one it will work for this one. It won't work for this one. So we have to give it to this one. So that was in the drama. And is based on her memoirs of things that actually happened. And they never said this to us. And it also did have the empty hospitals bit, which I know I've covered on The Pursuit of Truth, where I saw people on Facebook showing empty hospitals, and editing their material to, for their confirmation bias, in the sense that, when you go in, obviously the reception would have been empty. And then when they get to the areas, which I knew because I'd been to the hospital as well, and common sense is that, these COVID areas would be regulated with some kind of card, which they are. And when they'd get to that section, obviously they couldn't get in, and they'd edit and then go to another place and show it empty as if they got through. Of course, if they were genuine, there would be no edits in it. And it's funny how some truth seekers who would, if the government or the TV companies did the same thing, they would be pointing these things out, and yet they do them themselves. So yeah, I saw those things as well. So they did cover that as well. And, lots of different things. It certainly made my eyes open to, maybe that's the upside and downside of drama, that drama can sway you into thinking what it wants you to think, because drama is very powerful. It didn't seem to have the same effect as the Mr. Debates versus the Post office, but I assume that's because everyone knew about the COVID scandals. We all knew that the care homes didn't have rings around them, and the idea of putting people back in there was not a good one. So we all knew that, we've seen on the news this scandal unfold. So I think that's why it didn't have the same impact, because all we were really being told is, yes, you were all right in what you were thinking, and all these things did happen, they were bad, and there's a few extra ones that are bad as well. Whereas with the Post Office, a lot of people didn't know about it. They assumed that these people were guilty because that's how the news broadcast it for years. And so it did raise that awareness. But yeah, it was... What a world we live in, where we can't... and this doctor suggesting that the governments didn't tell the truth, and these inquiries, which we've covered a bit on The Pursuit of Truth, showing that there was a lot of problems dealing with this. And hindsight, they like to use that as an excuse, but a lot of us, on the YouTube's truthers, people in the industry, nurses, doctors, whatever, all knew these things and were saying these things. But as usual, the little people don't get listened to. You have to follow the guidance that the big people who are not even involved have made up. When the little people are saying, well, this doesn't work, well, there's a problem with this, we need to deal with it. And they just get ignored and saying, well, this is what it says, we have to do this. There was a lot of that in the drama as well, and there's a lot of that in life, and that's why we don't solve these problems.
Now, a spokesperson for the family of Alexei Navalny say they're struggling to find funeral directors who are willing to facilitate his burial. Kira Yarmish said they've been told directly that funeral directors have been prohibited from working with them. Well, less than 2 weeks since Navalny's death, another critic of President Putin, Oleg Orlov, has been sentenced to 2.5 years, found guilty of discrediting the Russian armed forces.
We live in the 21st century. They're going somewhere backwards, back from the 20th to the 17th and 16th. And unfortunately, they are dragging our country with them. But victory will be ours.
Well, our Moscow correspondent Diana Magnate has more.
It is 9 years to the day since Russia's then most famous opposition politician Boris Nemtsov was gunned down here outside the Kremlin. A little over a week and a half since Alexei Navalny's death, and just a few days since the second anniversary of Russia's war in Ukraine. And another grim marker today, a Moscow court has sentenced one of the country's most revered human rights defenders, Oleg Orlov, to 2.5 years in jail for supposedly repeatedly discrediting the armed forces. One of the main reasons this case has been brought against him now is because of an article he wrote a year ago entitled "You Wanted Fascism, You Got It," and claiming that the regime had descended into totalitarianism and fascism. In court, in his closing sentence, he said he did not repent or regret what he had said. He's worked for a very long time for the human rights group Memorial, which has won the Nobel Peace Prize in the past. And on this anniversary, he joins a very long list of political prisoners behind bars, Ilya Yashin and Vladimir Karamurza, who are two of the most prominent and both close friends of Boris Nemtsov, wrote tweets which were published today talking about the high cost of freedom. Ilya Yashin saying, "We are suffering heavy losses, but we will win." I think given the nature of Vladimir Putin's regime and the course that he seems to be taking, that is an open question.
Tyler Magnay reporting. Let me bring you some of today's other news.
Oh, it's worrying, really, isn't it? I mean, sometimes we worry about the state of freedom here and the stuff, but we're still lucky compared to some countries where, I mean, there is no freedom, or there's very little freedom. You have to really adhere to the, as it were, the party line. It gave me feelings of why George Orwell wrote, Animal Farm, when he was studying. A lot of people believe that it was his studying of Russia that led to them writing that. I don't know if that's true or not. And I felt that when I'm hearing this. So here's the next one. I'll get it queued up.
Welcome back to the UK tonight. Now, council bosses say neighbourhood services will have to be cut. That's despite a government bailout. We've all heard about struggling local authorities over the past year, places like Birmingham and Woking, with councils accused of financial mismanagement and poor planning. But according to research out today, the crisis is far worse than thought and much more widespread. A survey of council officials found more than half fear their authorities could go bust in the next parliament unless funding is reformed. Even worse, 9% said their council is likely to go bust within the next year. That perhaps explains the findings of a separate survey, which found 85% of councils are still planning cuts to key services despite extra government support. And more than 2/3 of councils expect to make savings in at least one neighbourhood service. We're talking about things like bin collections, library and leisure services. In the budget next week, the Chancellor is facing pressure from Tory MPs to announce tax cuts. But research suggests that the majority of voters actually want the government to use any fiscal headroom they may have to invest in public services. Only 11% of people want any extra funding to be used for tax cuts. Well, let's talk about this, shall we? We're joined now by Councillor Martin Ted, leader of the Conservative-run Buckinghamshire Council. We're also joined by Jonathan Carr-West, Chief Executive of the Local Government Information Unit, and Isabel Hunter, the Chief
While the National COVID Inquiry in Wales has been going on, also the Business Committee in Westminster has been hearing evidence from former post office postmasters about their fight for compensation in the wake of the Horizon computing scandal, which saw hundreds of people wrongly convicted for theft, fraud and false accounting. Well, joining me now is the former Post Office sub-postmaster Bal Gill, who's a victim of the Horizon scandal. Thanks so much for joining us once again on this. When we come round to these hearings, of which there have been quite a few, whether it's part of the official inquiry or in Parliament, do you welcome them, or do they fill you with dread at what you may or may not hear from these testimonies?
I think we welcome them in terms of getting transparency and keeping things moving forward. The fact, if anything, it keeps things in the public eye and keeps the schemes under scrutiny. I think it's just we're all frustrated because of the continual delays that have taken place. And really, we just want to get closure, to be honest.
In terms of who we're hearing from today, if we start with the current CEO, Nick Reed, as has been covered late last week and ahead of today, he sent a letter to the Justice Secretary, Alex Chalk, on the 9th of January to say that the Post Office would likely oppose appeals against 369 of the prosecutions. His take, if we summarise parts of the letter and testimony in the letter from legal advisors, was that some of those convictions weren't based on the Horizon faulty tech system. What was your reading of those comments? And if he reiterates them in person today on camera, how that would make you feel?
Oh, it's completely ridiculous and very, very painful to hear, for me, fellow colleagues, former sub-postmasters, who, after everything they've been through, the fact that whole perception they have, it hasn't changed. That kind of darkness, it still exists within the post office, and it's coming from the very top. And I think when I picked that up last week, I found it very, very painful. And I can only imagine. I mean, there's obviously a scope for where we had heard previously some of the overturning of convictions might have been unsafe, but the figures that he quoted and the very broad generalization he gave, it almost just it was like a knife in the back. I think that's how it felt, to be honest.
What are you going to be watching him throughout the day? I mean, do you think a lot of your fellow sub-postmasters will be as well?
Yes, for sure. I think we're all following very intensely because ultimately we want to see people like Nick held accountable for what he said. And beyond that, I think with the inquiry, we want to see that many people involved, the so-called mafia investigators and the people that have made our lives hell, we want to see these people brought to justice and made to tell the truth. And for that being a big part of our closure.
In terms of the other testimony, we're obviously also we are going to hear from the former chairman, Henry Staunton, who's been having this fairly public clash with the business secretary, Kemi Badenoch, who removed him from his post. What do you make of the details there, where he seemed to suggest he was pressured early in his tenure not to speed up payments? That's been disputed by both the business secretary and also Sarah Mumby, the former top civil servant in the office. What questions have you got for him? What clarifications would you like him to give?
I think, again, just to get clarity on the whole situation, I think you have to take the comments from both sides at the moment on face value. I think for us, personally, I don't want things to become about a tit-for-tat argument between people where there's a real priority has to be, and without being selfish, I don't think I am in this case, but I think without being selfish, it needs to be focused on us. And I find sometimes these things that almost feel like delays or not significant, like, okay, he's got a perception of what may have happened, but if that can be cemented and cleared up in the select committee, then I would be happy to hear that, to be honest.
I think you're well within your rights to feel like there's a lot of tit for tat and not focus on the factors in this case. Just stepping back from all of this, I mean, in general, the fact that the government is trying to move ahead by passing legislation that will overturn decisions made by the judiciary, which itself is pretty significant. If we do see that go through, if we do ultimately get there to the point where compensation is paid, will that be enough? Do you think that will be a great relief when that moment arrives, even if it's arriving too late?
I think it's been such a delayed moment that I don't really think that far. I think we have to live in the present moment, just because there's been so much uncertainty and so many obstacles put in our way. I mean, we did receive, or the interim payments were confirmed. I think they were confirmed during the select committee this morning. And even though that's welcome, I mean, generally they're breadcrumbs compared to to what should be on the table. And I think also that generally for anyone receiving that predominantly is going to be used to levy debt that they've accumulated, waiting for these things to be resolved. And I think also that a lot of people will be making decisions that it's like a distressed decision that, okay, so they might be then, because of the continuing delays, they might in a distressed position maybe accept a smaller offer or a derisory offer. I think from our perspective, I think we just want everything settling, you know, and we want them to stop this kind of micro-analyzing of everything. Like, take us on face value. Like, it's taken 20 years of evidence. Finding evidence from 20 years ago is very, very difficult. I've spent 3 years trying to accumulate all the information I can, and then to have everything. I think we're all worried that, like, the approach is very intense for us, and we didn't expect that. We expect them to be to at least after everything, not question us in that way. And I think that's the fear, is that we get to that day of when this big fanfare that all the compensation has been paid, but ultimately, how many people will deep down be satisfied with what they receive? So I think there's still a lot of work to do. I mean, there's good, we have good legal teams in Hudgels and Freeds and people fighting our corner, and I'm sure there's people on the other side also who want to get these things resolved. But I just think it's been very bureaucratic, and I think we just want a resolution on this, to be honest.
Balvinder Gill, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, you're watching Sky News.
Why are we under this one umbrella? Why can't you just look at people for who they are? Person-centered approach. But no, that was just taken away. I just wanted to be like the wider public. I wanted to make sure that I had the same opportunities as the general public, rather than because I'm stuck in a supported living accommodation. I've got to apply by their rules, by their boards. When say someone's with a complex disability who's been told to isolate longer, that's obviously fair enough. It might affect their lungs or if they have trouble breathing, but that's not me. So why put that big umbrella on everyone? And it was just not fair.
I'm a laboratory manager. I live in Cardiff but work in Bristol, so I do commute every day. When lockdown actually first got announced, I actually got put on shielding for 3 months because I have quite severe asthma. I've literally not got a single person to speak to. I'm not supposed to leave the house. How can I do anything? My parents live in Cardiff and they were put on shielding, and I thought, well, I can't help my parents, can't support them, go and do shopping for them and what have you. And then with the government rules changing literally every day, it was meant that I was then having to have meetings with my senior teams and work out what to do, and then try and disseminate it to my teams, but not being able to be there to support them in person. I had to make sure that I knew what the Wales rules were for myself and what I can and can't do. And then I had to know the England rules of what I can do when I'm in work and with my team. And quite often they'd be different and they'd be opposing as well. So trying to keep track of that when everything was changing so frequently was very confusing, really confusing.
People with a learning disability did not understand all that well because of the news and all stuff like that. I know people with a learning disability need plain understanding, easy to hear, but from the news angle, it wasn't all that good. The information they give you afterwards, after you have the injection as well, is not easy to understand. People with a learning disability should know more. They need to know more about what's going on and all, but in plain, easy language, no jargon, no nothing, but plain easy.
Dwi wedi byw drwy lot, ond mynd I fewn yna, cael operation, fues I yna am 5 mis. 5 mis, a diolch I Dduw bod yn nyrsys I gael. Na chi'n gweld beth oedd y nyrsys yn mynd drwy ddo. Welis I ferch un waith, un wair. A wedyn cael message ar yr iPad a so wedi cael Covid. Ddech chi gael milltir o'r cartra. Ie. Ach bod yng ngladda, reit, da ni'n Gymru ac yn ffeili mynd I ddeud. Ie, ffeili mynd I ddeud. Dim ond gobeithio na fel ni byth yn byd fel un eto. Wedi colli lot o ffrindiau.
I've tried to write down some of my experiences as a very senior doctor in the hope that people will listen and not repeat the errors of the past. Being someone who suffered long COVID from before it had a name and still suffers, we must plan in the future for the long-term effects of pathogens and expect them. There was the phenomenal pain of acute COVID. There was the appalling pain of the headache. All over pain, physical pain of long COVID, the pain in the muscles, the pain in the chest. But in a sense, that is nothing compared to the psychological pain. The pain of hearing that people are being dismissed. People aren't being listened to. And the majority of adults of working age who have long COVID are struggling to keep jobs down. They've lost their jobs. It is a disability. There's no ifs, buts or maybes about that. You are disabled, and therefore your employment and your workplace should be adapted to allow you to do what you can when you can. That's part of the hope, that we learn and we plan and we act on it and we do it better. Please.
When my dad went into hospital, obviously I was conscious the whole time. A very good chance he was going to catch COVID because the hospital's old, it's unventilated. They rang and said, look, it's not looking good. COVID pneumonia has taken hold. We're going to send him up to a ward. So we just texted our sort of goodbyes to a nurse on the ward in the hope that she would read them out. You know, he died alone at 9 o'clock on the Monday night.
The doctor said, it doesn't look good. It's unlikely she will survive, and you need to come in if you are willing to say your goodbyes. She was in a ward on her own. I tried everything I could to convince her to fight and to go back on the CPAP and do whatever she could, really, to come out of it. The following morning, it was Christmas Eve morning, rang the ward, got through to a nurse, asked about my sister, long pause, put through to the same doctor to be told she passed away half an hour earlier.
You know, there was norovirus, there was COVID multiple times, there was sepsis, multiple water infections, huge weight loss, and you could just see the life
just
sucking out of him.
And all of a sudden I said, I want him home, I'm getting him home, he's coming home. The sister on the ward promised me faithfully, but when he comes home, he will be tested for COVID. No, he wasn't. He came home with a chest infection, and when he came home after a couple of days, he obviously wasn't very well. The district nurse came in one day and said, I'll just test him for COVID, and he tested positive. He was too far gone when he came home, so they had sent him out like that.
Os bydd wedi gweld rhywun lle mae'n cymryd mwy sylw, bys nhw wedi cael pethau lot well a di parhau bywyd o. Tam bryd dwi'n gwybod, sneb yn gallu deud, ond dwi'n dal meddwl bod oedd gallu fyny at 6 mis gwahaniaeth. Am bod ar amser oedd nhw'n sbio at pethau lot mwy well, oedd o ddim mor gry ac oedd ddim mor gymaint oedd o'n gallu cymryd. Dwi'n dal meddwl, os yna rhywbeth i gael ei sbio ar amser hynny, bysa pethau di parhau lot mwy na be nath nhw'n y diwedd. Dwi wedi gweld ffrindiau sydd wedi cael rhywbeth tebyg mwy blwyddyn dwytha, lle maen nhw wedi cael ei gweld reit sydyn a maen nhw dal yn byw.
With all the restrictions that we had with the funeral, we had to make decisions that were very difficult for anybody who was bereaved in this situation. With our family being in England and me being in Wales, I had to make a decision to keep them safe. You know, it was just awful. I cannot imagine what he went through in the hospital and the fear he would have had, and thinking he'd been abandoned, that I couldn't visit and couldn't talk to him. He wasn't a mobile phone person, he didn't do technology at all. So he had to just go by messages that I was passing on through the staff, and they were telling me how he was each day, and that was what was happening with us.
Mi fu rhaid trefnu angladd carys a gwasanaeth yn yr amlosgfa, a mi oedd hynny yn anodd oherwydd oedden ni gorfod gweithio o fewn cyfyngiadau, niferoedd, pwy oedd yn gallu bod tu fewn, pwy oedd yn gallu bod tu allan, pethau newid trwy'r amser. Ac un peth dwi'n cofio yn sefyll allan yn fawr iawn yn y meddwl oedd y faint o bobl fysa wedi lecio bod yna ac oedd yn methu, achos oedd hi'n berson poblogaidd iawn, oedd hi yn ei gwaith, y criw yr ysgol, ffrindiau o adra, oedden nhw'n gallu ymuno mewn link i wylio ar-lein, ond hynny ddim yr un fath, a doedden ni ddim yn gallu cydganu chwaith.
You kind of left with this feeling of him being completely failed. He lived life to the extremes and the NHS saved him so many times. But in this last year of his life, it completely let him down. We're not here just moaning and reliving our stories for the sake of it. We actually want some change, because what happened with my dad was wrong, systematically wrong, and it cannot happen again.
It's a year and a half now, isn't it?
It doesn't go away.
You think
in the
after
manner,
the year you'd feel better,
but he died.
you don't.
If he'd have just died.
Peacefully.
Yeah, but he didn't. He suffered, and he suffered, and he suffered, and we were screaming for help.
I do feel aggrieved. I feel let down as a family in the way in which the circumstances played out for us as a family. The one thing I don't want and wouldn't want to happen is that COVID just becomes this tiny little blip in history, and we glance over it because it's possibly a bit inconvenient to look at it. We all as a nation and as individuals need to stop and think. Not just about ourselves, but about the wider picture.
So some powerful testimony there coming from the opening sequences of the first day of the national COVID inquiry in Wales. We're going to continue to monitor those proceedings and bring you into the Middle East. And in the last hour, the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza has said that more than 30,000 people have been killed in the territory since Israel's war on Hamas began last October. Joining me now is our Middle East correspondent, Alistair Bunkle. Ali, it's a sort of terrifying number, threshold to see crossed, and I guess just increases the focus once again on the prospects, real or distant, for some form of pause in fighting or ceasefire.
Yes, as you say, confirmation in the last few minutes that the death toll in Gaza in under 5 months of fighting has now surpassed 30,000 dead and more than 70,000 wounded. That figure, of course, is a vast figure, but it includes, according to Israeli military estimates, around 12,000 dead being Hamas fighters, although international organizations operating in Gaza believe that amongst the civilians killed, a large proportion of those have been women and children. So, yeah, there is obviously a vicious war being fought between Israel and Hamas as Israel moves through the Gaza Strip and is systematically dismantling and eliminating Hamas's military capabilities and Hamas fighters. But as is always the case with war, but particularly in this war, there is a very high civilian toll being paid as well. Not just the dead and the injured, but also the humanitarian crisis that is ongoing in Gaza, the inability for many people to get basic supplies like food, water, medicines. A lot of the hospitals are now either out of action or are really kind of struggling to stay operational, and so aid organisations warning of a potential looming famine, and people who are injured are often unable to receive the medical care that they need to treat their injuries. As for a potential ceasefire, as you mentioned, Wilf, the talks are ongoing in Qatar at the moment. There was some optimism earlier on in the week when President Biden suggested there could be a hostage deal and a ceasefire agreed by this coming Monday. I think most people felt that that was overly optimistic. Perhaps it was the US president putting some pressure on the various negotiating sides. But there is definitely an impetus to try and have something agreed by the start of Ramadan, which is around the 10th of March. So what are we talking about? 10 days or so away now. And those talks are ongoing. We understand that the Israeli team that's in Qatar is due to return to Israel today, and there will be a meeting of the war cabinet, but it's about trying to find agreement between two sides who are in a bitter war with each other, and there's a lot of technical details to be ironed out.
Ali Bunkle, thanks so much, as always. Dame Esther Ranson has made a renewed call for MPs to debate the law on assisted dying. The 83-year-old star, whose state has stage 4 cancer, says the current law is a mess and families like hers desperately need change. Her daughter told Sky News this morning that everybody deserves this choice.
Everything surrounding this is messy. We could make it so much easier. The fact that mum is dying is appalling. I can't bear it. I speak to her half a dozen times a day, at least. She is my person. I don't want to think about her dying. But if I do, I want to think about her having her choices and her to have the comfortable, dreamlike death of in her bed, surrounded by her family, and having a fabulous last meal, and then taking a very careful cocktail of drugs that gives her an incredibly painless death. Who wouldn't want that?
Well, the government is coming under pressure to become more actively involved in the debate over assisted dying, as MPs warn it's looking increasingly likely it will be legalised in at least one part of the UK. The Isle of Man is on course to become the first British Isle to allow it, as the subject continues to deeply divide opinion across the nation. Our health correspondent, Ashish Joshi, has been there and sent this report.
What can you do? Can you do me sits?
Sue's dogs are her distraction. A distraction from the pain and the loss after months of sitting at her dying husband's bedside. In July 2021, Simon was diagnosed with the most aggressive form of motor neurone disease. He developed serious stomach complications and a chronic bed sore.
I eventually said to the nurse, why is this so bad? Why can't you get rid of it? And she said, I'm sad to say that Simon is decomposing while he's still alive.
As Simon grew weaker, he took what little action he could to speed up the inevitable. He stopped eating.
He'd chosen to starve himself to death if it carried on any longer. But at the point where he got that bad, it was too late to starve himself to death.
Do you want to see a change in the law?
Desperately. I don't want to see anybody suffer like Simon did.
So this is the House of Keys, our Parliament on the Isle of Man.
In parliaments across the British Isles, formal and informal talks are taking place to see if and how assisted dying can be legalised. Nowhere is closer to making it a reality than here on the Isle of Man.
As people become more au fait with how assisted dying works, as they actually see it in practice and get the right training and support, more and more people see the benefits of it.
The proposed bill would make assisted dying available to patients who meet a strict criteria. They must be adults who have the capacity to make decisions for themselves. Residents must have spent more than a year living on the Isle of Man. They must be suffering from a terminal illness where there is no likelihood of improvement, and expected to die within 6 months. The proposals would see assisted dying provided through the island's health system, with doctors potentially offered an opt-in clause.
It's the people with vulnerability that I'm most concerned about, that maybe coerced, maybe feel a perception of being worthless and not want to be here, maybe feel that not being a burden to their family is the right answer. And it's these vulnerable people in society that I feel may be sucked into assisted dying.
Whatever happens here on the Isle of Man has no direct bearing on the rest of the British Isles. But it does show that some very difficult conversations are taking place. And if the assisted dying law is passed here, well, that could propel change elsewhere. All sides accept that this difficult debate must happen. It's about who has control over your life and death.
Sit.
Ashish Joshi, Sky News on the Isle of Man.
A very good afternoon to you. The Foreign Secretary has urged Israel to hold back its military operation in Gaza amid growing concern about civilians in the southern city of Rafah. More than 1 million people are sheltering there after being displaced from their homes elsewhere in the Gaza Strip. Well, overnight, an IDF mission to rescue hostages in the city was reported to have killed at least 67 Palestinians. The Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry says at least 67 people were killed and dozens injured in Rafah during Israeli airstrikes. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised those who were involved in the rescue of Fernando Simon Marmon, who's 60, and Luis Har, who's 70. He also said pressure on Rafah would be sustained. Well, later today, US President Joe Biden will be meeting Jordan's King Abdullah II in Washington, where the pair are expected to discuss the ongoing efforts to free hostages in Gaza. It comes after President Biden urged Benjamin Netanyahu not to start a ground offensive in Rafah without plans to protect civilians. Earlier, the Foreign Secretary Lord Cameron echoed those calls. He said Israel should stop and think before taking any further action in Gaza.
We are very concerned about what is happening in Rafah because, let's be clear, the people there, many of them have moved 4, 5, 6 times before getting there. And it really, we think, is impossible to see how you can fight a war amongst these people. There's nowhere for them to go. They can't go south into Egypt. They can't go north and back to their homes because many have been destroyed. So we are very concerned about the situation, and we want Israel to stop and think very seriously before it takes any further action. But above all, what we want is an immediate pause in the fighting, and we want that pause to lead to a ceasefire, a sustainable ceasefire without a return to further fighting. That's what should happen now. We need to get those hostages out, including the British nationals. We need to get the aid in. The best way to do that is stop the fighting now and turn that into a permanent, sustainable ceasefire.
Well, Lord Cameron there speaking a few hours ago. Let's take a closer look at the situation in Rafah. Well, Rafah is Gaza's most southern city, situated on the border with Egypt. It was one of the few areas not targeted by the Israeli ground offensive until last night, that is. The city provided refuge to more than half of Gaza's population who fled fighting elsewhere, with an estimated 1.4 million people sheltering there. Sky's Diana Magnay has this report for us from Jerusalem.
Rescued after 4 months in captivity, the Israeli military says these men, 61-year-old Fernando Simon Marman and 70-year-old Luis Ha, have been rescued from a residential building in Rafah. Israel says the men were kidnapped by Hamas from kibbutz near Yitzhak on October the 7th. They are only the second and third Israeli hostage to have been rescued in what the IDF says was a complex operation.
Early in the morning, special forces broke into a building in the heart of Rafah. On the second floor, Luis and Fernando were held by armed Hamas terrorists who were in the building and in the neighbouring buildings.
Relatives say the government must stay focused on getting the rest home.
It doesn't matter if it's babies, women, men, elder people, everybody must come back as soon as possible. And we know about the discussions in Cairo or in Paris and others between the Hamas, between Israeli, with the mediators. Please, be serious and strike a deal.
Israel says many militants were killed as a result of the operation. Scores of dead and injured were brought to Rafah's Kuwaiti hospital, with local health ministry estimates for the death toll escalating with every hour. The focus of the fighting remains for now in Khan Yunis, the IDF saying it's going well, but it's not done yet. And when the operation begins for real in Rafah, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said evacuation back to the north is possible for the near 1.5 million people now living there.
The areas that we've cleared north of Rafah, plenty of areas there, but we're working out a detailed plan to do so. And that's what we've done up to now. We're not cavalier about this. This is part of our war effort to get civilians out of harm's way. It's part of Hamas's effort to keep them in harm's way.
Mr. Netanyahu believes that sending troops into Rafah is necessary to win the war against Hamas in its final stronghold and to bring the rest of the hostages home. But there is considerable international pressure, including from Israel's biggest ally, the United States, not to attack the city, and certainly not without a credible plan to protect civilians there. For all the positive news on the hostages, Israel has also announced overnight the death of 2 soldiers, Adi Eldor and Eilon Kleinman, both 21 years old, killed in southern Gaza. Diana Magnay, Sky News, Jerusalem.
Well, Diana sent us this update from Jerusalem a few hours ago.
I think what we hear in public, in broadcasts from Benjamin Netanyahu, is possibly quite different from the kinds of conversations that he's having with Joe Biden in private. And as far as we understand from a US official who was briefing on their conversation last night, and they had another 45-minute phone call, there is still the possibility of a deal in the offing between Israel and Hamas, as the US, Egypt and Qatar have been trying to negotiate for a while now. And according to that official, some progress, or great progress, could be made on that deal within the coming week. So, you know, if we are to understand the signals that the US is sending, Mr. Netanyahu is not completely ignoring the US. And I think that in his interview yesterday to ABC, the Israeli Prime Minister did say, we are working on an evacuation plan. We are not cavalier about civilian protection. There are areas back in the north which we have cleared where civilians could go. But I think it is, of course, tantamount for the West and all of those concerned internationally that Israel adds some clarity to that plan, and I believe that the IDF is working on it. Clearly, Israel feels that the rescue operation conducted by a combined operation between Shin Bet, the intelligence services, the police, Israeli police, who are working together with the IDF there, and special forces, is separate from a ground force operation by the IDF in Rafah to annihilate the 4 Hamas battalions remaining there. So they think that this operation to rescue 2 hostages should not be counted as their final onslaught on Hamas in Rafah. But all of this is clearly extremely delicate, and although Israel says they have a plan to evacuate the 1.4 million people in Rafah, we have yet to see some flesh on the bones of that plan. So a lot still to be clarified, the death toll mounting, but as you say and heard in that report, good news at least for 2 Israeli hostage families. And actually, just to add a really magnanimous comment too from the parents of one of those IDF soldiers who was killed overnight in Gaza, saying their deaths must not be in vain. We must work to bring the rest of the hostages home.
Diana Magnay there for us. The Prime Minister has echoed calls for a pause in fighting. He was speaking in Harrogate an hour ago.
So we're deeply concerned about reports about a military operation in Rafah, given it's important to aid provision. So what we've been calling for is an immediate pause in hostilities so we can get more aid in and hostages out, and then build the conditions for a sustainable ceasefire. That remains the focus of all our diplomatic efforts.
Well, time now for some of the day's other stories, and police have dropped a rape.
Okay, next one. Not much more to say about that, is there? I think it's this one.
A very good morning to you. We start with breaking news, and President Putin has warned of the risk of nuclear war if NATO countries send troops into Ukraine. The Russian leader is speaking live right now in Moscow, delivering his annual address. Mr. Putin has said Russia is ready for dialogue with America on strategic stability, but at the same time accused the US of trying to inflict strategic defeat on Russia. He said if NATO troops were sent into Ukraine, the consequences would be tragic, and warned of the danger of nuclear conflict. This was his message a short time ago.
You have to make sure that the our western flank is properly protected here, particularly with regard to the expansion of NATO, Sweden and Finland. NATO and America are active in other parts of the world, of course, and they continue to lie there. And they are preparing to strike our territory, and using the best possible forces, the most effective forces to do so. But we remember the fate of those who tried to invade our territory. And of course, their fate will be much more tragic than anything that we could face. We have to work on bringing about new contours of security for Russia. And I think that all our efforts should be put in having negotiations with all the countries of the world in that respect. That is absolutely essential for all of us. Without Russia, there is no solid peace in the world.
Without Russia, there's no solid peace in the world. The line in the ending that clip there. Sean Bell's with me, as you can see. Sean, let's just touch on the first part of that clip. This threat once again of nuclear retaliation if NATO were to put boots on the ground in Ukraine. Talk us through the significance of that, and of course where this has all emanated from over the last couple of days.
Yeah, most of the speech so far has been more, it reflects a sort of growing confidence, I think, in Putin in the way that the war is going at the moment in Ukraine. And what we were listening out for, though, was very definitely after President Macron hinted at the fact that with the absence of weapons supplies to be able to go into to help Ukraine, what else could NATO do? And there was a suggestion that potentially putting boots on the ground, which is something to date has never been properly considered, or a no-fly zone. And sure enough, President Putin made very clear that if the NATO gets involved, that escalates the whole conflict. But it's worth remembering every time that from the moment the West got involved in providing weapons, Russia has been saber-rattling around the consequences of escalation, saber-rattling about the consequences of potentially escalated to a nuclear conflict, but clearly that's largely been threats, empty threats so far.
Of course, UK, US, Germany all sort of poured cold water on that Macron suggestion, and with that kind of undermined him a little bit. Talk to us about the speech as a whole. Obviously, it's crossed an hour, as it usually does. Kind of quite a test for parliamentarians there to make sure that they're seeming interested throughout. What is the significance of this annual speech? It's an election year there, of course, in inverted commas, and the fact that so much of it's taken up once again by the situation in Ukraine.
From a military perspective, I think what's fascinating is we will commentate on what we see as their war, trying to speculate on how Putin is justifying it to the Russian population. What we're seeing firsthand here is the narrative that he's explaining. He's blaming the US for a lot of this. He's blaming the expansion of NATO. He's talking specifically about Sweden joining and about Finland joining, about they're going to have to strengthen their... It's almost like an embattled Russia. And it's worth saying the context, actually, the Russian economy, despite the 2022 being a bad year, it grew last year more than the US, more than the UK economy. So he's actually, I think, sounding more and more confident that he's saying, the majority of Russians support this, it's going the right way. He's showcasing some of the high-tech equipment. He's been talking about hypersonic weapons. In a speech like this, it's largely to show off what the Russian military is doing, and he's also claiming it's had unrivaled combat experience. It feels very much like a confident Putin on the stage today.
Sure, as always, thanks so much. We've got some sad breaking news, and the TV chef Dave Meyer.
Okay, so there we go. I don't know, I mean, what a world we live in, huh? I think that's everything. I don't think there's anything more I've got for you. I don't know, I mean, this is like, I don't know, it's been like nearly a month's worth of stuff for the pursuit of truth. It's going to be, I don't know how long this is going to be, because I've done it over a few days. And it's just, I mean, it's quite depressing, isn't it, the world we live in? It's whether it's the Ukraine war, whether it's the Israel-Hamas war, whether it's the COVID inquiry, whether it's what's happening in Russia with freedom. I mean, there's just so much going on. I don't know, councils, there was a bit there that I actually put the wrong one on, but I think I'm going to leave it in just because it had about the councils running out of money, and so obviously they're going to have to make cuts. There was another one, I didn't have it there, where they were talking about the cuts to special education as well, the nurseries that they promised that they'd have extra hours for, but they don't have enough staff for them. So there's lots of this stuff going on. And all of these things, all these stories, all these depressing realities of our lives, and obviously, depending where you are, even more real. If you're a Palestinian, or if you're Israeli, if you're a Russian, if you're someone who suffered from COVID, all these things, or suffering now because it hasn't finished, they're happening to you. But all of this, like I'm saying, all of this, if you umbrella it all together, is all to do with the system that we live within, the system that we all chose and thinking this is the only way. And I know I bang on this drum every single time, but it's what I think has to be come back to. That's the reason for all these things, is to show you, yeah, there's so much depression, but all of it is to do with the system that, you know, it doesn't have to be this way, you know. Well, I guess the problem is, like I always say, it's because we've got 7 billion people currently, roughly, no one's counted, but people on this place that we found ourselves upon, free, you know, to do whatever we want. And we've chosen a system over the thousands of years that can keep us shackled up to this idea of money, this idea of power, this idea of that 1% can control everything, you know, that we have hierarchies, that we have, you know, that we're born intrinsically the same. Each baby loves each other baby. We're all equal intrinsically, yet we all lose that the minute that we grow up and we teach each other that this is the only way, and, you know, that this is my border, this is my land, I should be patriotic to this bit, and I should, you know, watch the news, watch TV, watch what's taught at school of which people that I should like and dislike, even though there's no actual personal interconnection with that. You know, that the West will have its enemies like North Korea, like Russia, like China. If you're in China, it'll be America. If you're in North Korea, it's America as well. If you're, you know, in another country, it might be, you know, if you're in Spain, or what's that, the disputed territory, the I can't remember its name now. It might be England, Britain, or UK. You know, wherever there's each different country will have their, you know, who are their supporters and who are the countries together. Why are we like this? Why are we like this? We're all human beings. If you cut us, do we not bleed? As Shakespeare would say. You know, it's meant to be, well, most of us are meant to be religious, you know, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Jewish, Buddhists, Sikhs, whatever religion it is. And most of them, you know, the God talks about, you know, equality and us all being, you know, children of God and serving Him and humanity. You know, and look at how we're all acting. We're all cutting ourselves up and following our forefathers who've put us in these boxes, you know, and these boxes, I mean land. You know, that this is your bit of land and this is the people you have to care about and fight for and be patriotic about, and not like the other bits, and not help out the other bits, and, you know, have trade wars and money differences that have been set for thousands of years that were never equal in the first place, interests so that countries always stay poor, and that, you know, it's not the best use of our efforts, our energy, our resources and humanity to keep us all unequal like this. Because when we're all equal, there's no reason for not to be, because we have everything that we need. We have all the energy, we have all the ideas, we have all the land, we have all the resources. It's just sharing all this information and not coupling it up with money and interest and debt and all that stuff that keeps us, you know, individually and collectively suffering unnecessarily. That's the intrinsic truth. Anyway, so that's like they've got the evidence before to show you with the news clips and the explanation. But anyway, I don't know what you think. Take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace.